Good morning, everybody. Are you all sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin. There's only a certain generation gets that reference. My name is John Barry, and you're very welcome to this morning's discussion, a joint event organised between the Green Party in Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland Interfaith Forum, with a heavy influence of Eco Congregation Ireland, which we're very welcome. So what we're going to do this morning is I'm going to hand over now in a moment to Clare Bailey, the Green Party leader here in Northern Ireland, to give a few words of welcome. And then I'll explain how we're going to run this morning's session in terms of our guest speaker, Alastair McIntosh, offering half an hour reflections on this topic of faith in, of, and the environment. There are many ways we could parse this particular issue. And then with a variety of responses from alternative faith positions and indeed a humanist position as well, from different representatives from those particular belief positions, and then an open discussion. So the event is being recorded, folks, just to let you know. Hopefully everybody's okay with that. So I'd like to hand over now to Clare Bailey, but before, could I just remind everybody to mute yourselves if you're not talking, just reduces the feedback. And just to let you know, if you're asking Alastair a question in particular because of his hearing difficulties, could you speak slowly? I know people from this part of the world, we often tend to speak very quickly, certainly if it's myself getting excited. So just bear in mind and try and slow down so that Alastair can fully hear your question. So I'd like to hand over to Clare.
Thank you very much, John. And welcome everyone. As John has said, my name is Clare Bailey. I am the leader of the Green Party of Northern Ireland, and also elected for South Belfast. Maybe to give you a bit of a context on the background of the Green Party and our what we call our Saturday sessions, and they have been running for a little while, where we would usually use this time slot to just have conversations among our members, invite people along to come and speak with the party, especially when they have knowledge and expertise in the particular area. And it's a great way for us to network and meet people active in their fields, and for us as a party to discuss issues in terms of policy or direction or takes, and engage with our membership on that. So that we've always found them incredibly useful. We look forward to our monthly sessions. And this one in particular, I think, is really, really exciting. So we're absolutely thrilled to have been linked up. Thank you, David Ross, for doing that as well with the Northern Ireland Interfaith Network, and be part of your Interfaith Week of celebrations and events. So this is exciting. I'm looking forward to a lot of interesting conversations, fantastic speakers out there, and I think that we can all agree that we are in unprecedented times right now, where we have this collision of crises. So we have a pandemic and the health crises that it's bringing, the economic crisis that comes along with that, and of course then the climate crises, which I think that many have yet to begin to understand the real context and change that will come with that when we see it rolled out even more. So I'm really keen to listen to the conversations out there within the Interfaith Network, and really look forward to some interesting discussions. So thank you for linking in. Thank you for being here, and I'll hand back over to John Barry.
That's great. Thank you, Clare. It's probably a mark both of Alastair and how many of us have read his work, but also the topic that this is by far and away the biggest event we've ever held on these Saturday morning sessions, and that in a way probably tells us something. So just to run through the event in a little bit more detail before I hand over to our guest speaker, Alastair McIntosh. Alastair's going to speak for about half an hour. So Alastair, you can adjust your clock slightly now and give yourself until 11:40 as opposed to 11:35 in terms of your contributions. And then after Alastair has spoken, we will have 5 responses, and I hope all the people I'm going to call out now are here now representing different belief and non-belief systems. So after Alastair has spoken, we'll have representing the Islamic faith position, Abdelal from the Belfast Islamic Centre, then Vicky Heslop from the Buddhist community here in Belfast, then Puri from Indian Community Centre, Boyd Sleator from the Northern Ireland Humanist Association, and then finally Reverend Andrew Orr representing Eco Congregation Ireland. And if we just stick to that particular format as I've read them out, and I'll call you after Alastair has spoken. So just to introduce our guest speaker, Alastair McIntosh, I first came across Alastair, or heard of him. I mean, Alastair I've always described as kind of an old school, hedge school philosopher in that tradition in Ireland of an itinerant, radical voice, a self-made in many respects academic and so on, as opposed to the university system. When he was involved in, and I forget the exact name, I think it was the Edinburgh Human Ecology Centre, and I was doing a PhD in Glasgow at the time. And it was the first time I've ever heard somebody give, in an academic context, a theatrical performance that was also intellectually stimulating. And I think at that time, Alastair, when I first seen you, you stood up on a desk in a lecture theatre in Edinburgh in giving your talk, and I was absolutely amazed by your use of, you know, poetry, theatricality, but also a deep ethical and indeed theological groundedness to the work that you are involved in. And Alastair's latest book, which I'd encourage you all to read, because it's as you'll hear when Alastair speaks, it's a combination of a very good knowledge of the science of the planetary crisis in terms of, you know, ecological destruction, you know, issues around the climate crisis, but also leavened with ethics, a deep ethical sense, which Alastair will outline in a moment, but also a resolute focus on practicality in terms of what do we do. It's not enough simply to describe what's going wrong with the world. It's also important to try and come up with practical solutions. And certainly Alastair's latest book, Riders on the Storm, The Climate Crisis and the Survival of Being, which I read over the summer, is excellent. It's one of the best discussions in terms of particularly a hopeful understanding of the climate crisis. And without anticipating too much of what Alastair will say, he navigates very skillfully a course between climate apocalypticism and also then a naive kind of technological optimism that everything is going to be okay. But for me, and it's a book that I think I spent the longest reading because I didn't want it to end, is Alastair's book, Soil and Soul, People versus Corporate Power, from a few years ago, which I'd absolutely, again, highly recommend to you all. So, Alastair, over to you. We're looking forward to what you have to say, and then we'll have our 5 responses afterwards. So, Alastair, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Always forget to unmute myself. And then as my wife says, he can't stop. John and Claire and the rest of you in the Green Party here, thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm happy to speak to any political party, provided the agenda can be about that which gives life and life as love made manifest. Recently, I was asked to speak about something, and I said I'd like to say a few things about Donald Trump, and they said no, don't go into that. And in the end, I said it all anyway, because we have to bear witness to the truth in these matters, and we also have to speak across fences. I was in County Mayo a few years ago with Sister Maureen Lally, a Mercy sister up in Ballintappa there. And she had an American colleague over with her students. And I said to the American colleague, why do you bring them all the way to Ireland to speak to Sister Maureen and others? Can you not do it in America? And she said, I bring them to Ireland to learn how to have conversations across the garden fence. And I put it to you that in these times, those types of conversation across the garden fence, forgive me a moment, those kind of, just my hearing aid thing, now and again I have to adjust it, and I just knocked something off there. Those kind of conversations across the garden fence are the most important conversations. It's no good just staying within the green bubble or whatever bubble we might happen to inhabit. We've got to break out, and we've got to move in and speak with those who often it might not be comfortable to speak to. And this book, Riders on the Storm, that I've been asked to speak about today, it very much does that. I cross a lot of lines in here. It was a very uncomfortable book to write because I constantly knew I was walking on eggshells and that there would be groups of people that would be offended by this and that, but I had to speak to it anyway, as best I was capable of discerning it. And it's for the reader to judge what was happening. Now, John has asked me if I would speak today, first of all, to say a little bit about the actual climate science and what I've tried to do with it in this book, and then to move over to the faith perspectives. And it's that latter part which I think is most distinctive. You can get many different speakers to speak about the science, but weaving together a faith perspective, and especially an interfaith perspective, such as you have represented today, is not such a common thing. So forgive me if I go fairly briefly over the actual science. You can read the book if you want the 4 chapters that are on the science. About nearly half the book is actually on the science. Forgive me if I go fairly quickly over that and not get into the nitty-gritties of discussing this theory and that theory. In any case, that's not my expertise. My expertise is not as a climate scientist. What I would like to focus on is more the faith perspectives and see what they can bring to the table of what we need to do. So I think the best way I can approach this is by taking it in the kind of order that I've run in the book here and just describing to you what I've done here. I start off with a chapter called A Walk Along the Shore. And I'm just going to put on my screen sharing and show you a few slides, which will also lead into the second chapter, the impact of the world of ice, the impact on the world of ice and oceans. And what I'm basically doing here is that in the past 2 years, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the body set up by the United Nations to look at climate change, bringing together the best scientists on the subject. In the past 2 years, they've produced 3 reports. And I've actually taken them in a different ordering of their publication because it better suits my literary purposes. I've taken them, first of all, in the report on the oceans and the cryosphere, the world of ice. In other words, about 2/3 of the world's surface that is covered by oceans and ice, slightly more than that even. And then I've moved on to the report on climate change and human life. Let me just give you the formal names of these reports, if I can quickly. No, I'm not going to be able to find them quickly here. I thought I had it on pat here, but never mind. I can never find things in my own books, folks. But basically, oh, here we are. Yes. So you've got the special report on the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate. And then you've got the special report on climate change and land. And you've got a special report, and this is the most important one, global warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade. How can it be kept within that? So what I'm doing in these 3 chapters, chapters 2, 3, and 4, is I'm taking the main straight down the line IPCC position. Because my position on climate change, and this is a very important point to make, is that mostly we only know what we think we know about climate science because of the climate science. And therefore, if we vary from the climate science by either playing it down and denying it, saying the scientists are exaggerating, or equally, if we exaggerate the climate science by playing it up and cherry picking the most alarming or alarmist reports, if we start playing that game, we are only legitimate in doing that if we have grounds to think that we know better than what the scientists are saying. And there will be some people who say, well, the scientists have exaggerated the position. Well, I'll tell you, there's really no evidence of that, no significant evidence of that. On the contrary, the scientists have tended to be conservative because they don't want to overstate the position, because if they do overstate it, they make themselves hostages to fortune. The deniers will swoop in and say, well, what about you got the Himalayan glaciers wrong because of something that shouldn't have got into an earlier IPCC report. And they'll use that to screw the climate science and to discredit it. But equally, if you get people coming along saying the science says we're going to go extinct, you've got Professor Guy McPherson in America saying by the year 2026, there will not be a single human being left on Earth because we'll all have starved. And you've got other figures like Jem Bendel or Roger Hallam of Extinction Rebellion making less extreme statements, but still, you know, Roger Hallam, 6 to 7 billion dead because of climate change within the next 1 or 2 generations, within the next 25 to 50 years. If we go down those alarmist routes, the problem with that is that, again, we are setting ourselves up for discrediting the science. And this is why you will find a lot of scientists just now. Just in the past 48 hours, I've seen Michael Mann, who gave us a hockey stick curve of Penn State University. I've seen Richard Betts of the Met Office and the IPCC. And I've seen Professor Catherine Hayhoe, who interestingly is from, she's married to an evangelical pastor, but a leading climate change figure in America, all criticizing a recent report that in their view goes beyond the accepted science in an alarmist direction. And what these people are all saying is they're saying, look, folks, the science, the real science is quite alarming enough to precipitate action. We don't need to exaggerate it by telling our children they're all going to be dead unless they're very lucky within a few decades. Stick with what the science says. Otherwise, you're not only discrediting it, but you're also setting people up for disillusion. And, you know, I can think of a number of figures in climate change. Patrick Moore, who used to be with Greenpeace in Canada. Bjorn Long, what's his name? Bjorn
Lomborg.
Yeah, thank you, Lomborg. Thank you, Lomborg, somewhere up there. You see a nice Freudian slip. I was blocked from even remembering his name, but you know, he says he used to be involved in the Green Party, and then he became disillusioned by it, exaggerating the case. And you know, he's now a leading figure in what many of us would perceive as being climate change denial. So you know, this is the kind of thing. This is the kind of problem we set up if we don't take the science seriously. So what I've done is I've gone straight down the line with these 3 IPCC reports. And the bottom line of what they're saying, folks, is, you know, they're quite unambiguous. The situation is extremely serious. The combination of world population multiplied by our consumption, our greenhouse gas emissions per head, the combination of those 2 factors is churning out about 55 billion tons per annum of carbon dioxide equivalent, that is including other greenhouse gases calibrated as if it was CO2, methane and all the rest of it. 55 billion tons of greenhouse gas equivalent per year. And we have got to get that down to 0. We've got to get it down to 0 because CO2 is cumulative. Within human lifetimes, very little CO2 gets drawn back down into the rocks of the earth, rocks like limestone and coal, where it's locked away. And the consequence of not dealing with it, we see very clearly, for example, in global warming, that during the 20th century, we had about 150 millimeters, half of my 12-inch ruler here, of sea level rise, of global absolute sea level rise. By the end of this century, they're reckoning that it is likely to be another 43 centimeters, 43 to 83 centimeters. So 43 centimeters would be about that much. 83 would take me back to about, I'm extending my cable here, about this much here of sea level rise, although the IPCC says it could be as much as 2 meters. So even if you take the likely range, the way things are going, that by 2100, we'll be looking at just under a meter, between half a meter and a meter of sea level rise in vulnerable areas by the coast of roads, of housing and what have you. In vulnerable areas, that means that the kind of flooding like you see in the city of Cork or Galway there or whatever, you know, many loved places are just are likely just to go. And on top of that, and I go into this in some depth because being from the Outer Hebrides, it particularly interests me. On top of this, there's growing evidence of increased, quite radically increased storminess at sea. And if you speak to old-time sea captains around the Northeast Atlantic coast, around the Hebridean and Irish coast, you know, they will tell you that the storms these days just don't blow over quickly the way they used to. They tend to be much more intense and they tend to stay with us longer. And the data, the important thing is the data is backing that up. So, you know, that's on the flooding level, or at least on the sea level, rise level. You've then got extreme weather events. I mean, basically, you know, climate change, it means warming the earth. If you turn up the cooker, you turn up the steam in the kitchen, and what goes up must come down somewhere. So we're getting these extreme flooding events, extreme weather events leading to flooding becoming more and more common, as you know. And then in some parts of the world, because weather patterns change, you get much more susceptibility to fire, like we've been seeing in Australia and California and up in the Arctic and so on. You've got all of this going on. On top of that, you've got what the IPCC refers to areas of deep uncertainty. And the principal area of deep uncertainty that the IPCC flags up is what is happening in the Arctic. Now, the IPCC, as I show here, it treats what is happening in the Arctic as alarming, but it does not treat it in an alarmist way. In fact, serious climate scientists are bending over backwards at the moment to discredit the idea that we are likely to see an imminent methane bomb going off, such as the likes of McPherson sinks will render us all extinct by 2026. They say that just does not fit with the science. That is the wrong take on the science. And you'll see that coming through in the IPCC reports. But each time, I was looking just the other day, you know, there was a report that was saying, you know, we're beyond tipping points. We can't do anything about it now. This was 2 days ago. And the report on it had over 3,000 retweets on Twitter. And yet the scientists like Michael Mann and Catherine Hayhoe and Richard Betts, all eminent professors in their fields, the scientists who are saying, wait a minute, this particular model in a report done not by climatologists, but by 2 business school professors, this particular model is not what we would consider to be very sound climate science. And their tweets on the matter, you know, they were getting a few dozen hits at the time that I looked. So it's basically like the bad news spreads very fast. The less bad news doesn't spread so fast. So one of the things that I'm doing here in my mid chapters in Riders in the Storm is that I'm saying the situation is very dire. The remedies proposed in the 1.5 degree containing global warming report of the IPCC are pretty unpalatable remedies. They're remedies that would involve taking over something like half of the world's agricultural land and using it for fast growth, not your beautiful forests, but your fast growth plantation, probably genetically engineered to maximize the degree of carbon capture, which you would then turn into biofuels, and you'd then pump the carbon dioxide used from burning those biofuels from energy, you'd pump that down underground. So you'd be producing both energy for power stations and you'd be pumping the CO2 underground at the same time. But, you know, all of this is unproven technology, hideously expensive technology. There's technologies for sucking the giant fans powered by solar or wind. You know, that in itself needs a huge amount of land. Or, wait for it, for nuclear energy, giant fans powered by nuclear energy, sucking in the atmosphere and sucking out and using chemical processes to remove the CO2 and then pumping that down into the earth. There's all of this kind of thing being talked about. But at the end of the day, as I've shown here, the IPCC is basically saying, you know, it's theoretically possible, but it's not yet proven, and it would raise huge political difficulties. You know, if you imagine if you tried saying to the Northern Irish farmers, well, sorry folks, but you know, you can get rid of most of your agriculture. You can get rid of that. We're going to do agriculture in future by hydroponics. You know, by basically feeding nutrients in greenhouses, like a lot of Dutch agriculture basically is already. We're going to get rid of all of your traditions, and we're going to use you as a place for growing the fastest growing tree species that we then burn to produce food, fuel, and pump the CO2 down. You can see that that is part of the solution. Reforestation, rewilding, these things are part of the solution. But when you look at the scale that is required, you know, there's no escaping, folks. Basically, and the conclusion I come to here is that we've got to cut down on our consumption. And if more and more consumers, if more and more people in the world are increasing their consumption, we also have to look at the population issue. And I'm acutely aware of how explosive any mention of that is, of both consumption and population. But the point that I make in Riders in the Storm is that this is not about population control. Consider Ireland. You know, at one time it was normal for an Irish family to have six or eight children. Now your fertility rate, the number of children per woman in Ireland is down to 2, which is below the replacement rate of 2.1. Just take some other countries here, because people often say, well, you know, the Catholic countries, there'll be a dead loss in this. Well, actually, Brazil, 1.7 is the fertility rate. Portugal, 1.2. You see, it's not the religion that's stopping it. Well, you see, what about the Muslims? You've got Muslim representation here today. Well, Malaysia, where's my figure for Malaysia here? I've lost it. I think it's 1.8, something like that. You know, a Muslim country. And basically, what does that? What achieves that? It's not anybody, you know, it's not going around forcing people to have abortions or contraceptive injections or anything like that. It's very simple. I put it into a pyramid. I don't know if you can see that in the book there. It's a pyramid. I put it here. Respect, equality for women, education for women, voting rights for women, economic opportunity for women, urban or well-connected rural living, family welfare and security in old age, good perinatal care and low infant mortality, effective family planning services and late family start, and resolving the patriarchal domination and violence in society. You see, that's the way we do it, folks. And that's a complete, you know, that's not an agenda of the political right. So, you know, the way that I see it is that both on our level of population in the world and on our consumption, we need to bring both of those down, but population is actually starting to take care of itself for these very reasons. More deeply, how do you do that? Well, I am a great fan of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It's agenda for the 2030 of these goals. And I'll just read you some of them. Number 1, no poverty. 5, gender equality. 7, affordable and clean energy. decent work and economic growth. Now there's a problem one, but you see, economic growth for whom? The poor countries of the world, they need more economic growth. We in the rich world need degrowth. And this is why faith becomes so important, which I'm going to come to in a moment. Number 12, responsible consumption and production. Number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Peace, justice, and strong institutions. So I'm not, how's my time running here? Oh my goodness, I better push and move on. I want to move now onto the faith aspects, and I want to quickly touch on the faith aspects. Let's just, where am I here? Let's start with the humanists. I mean, I don't know whether humanists consider themselves to be a faith, but as I understand it, humanism is based upon rationality. And so I would say, you know, a humanist expression is like you have here, a report that came through the post the other day to me from the Natural Environment Research Council. It's about trust the science, do the science. I would sum it up in 2 words: evidence base. Evidence. What is the evidence base? So, you know, that can be my nod to the humanist perspective. I'd like to come next to Islam here. I have the Yusuf Ali translation of the Holy Quran here. I won't read you, I mean, there's many ecological passages in the Quran. I would like to draw attention instead to this, this little book of the Hadiths, the oral tradition of the Prophet. And I'm just going to give you an idea because, you know, we so often get a harsh image of Islam, and that's not how Muslims experience it. You know, that would be like judging Christianity from what the kind of gun-toting fundamentalists in America represent as Christianity. And here's just one of the many stories in the chapter here from the Hadith, the oral tradition, headed Duty to Animals. Once upon a time, a man who was passing along the way felt a severe thirst. He found a well into which he descended and drank water thereof. Then as he came out, he saw a dog holding its tongue and eating the damp earth out of thirst. The man said to himself, "This dog has come to these dire straits out of thirst, like that which oppressed me." So he descended a second time into the well, and filling his boot with water and holding it in his mouth, he came out and gave the dog a drink. For this act of his, God was grateful to him and pardoned him his sins. So, you know, there are many, many stories like that in the Hadith, in addition to what you have in the Quran here. I want to move on now to the Hindu, to the Hindu tradition, the Upanishads, the ancient texts of Hinduism. And you just listen to this kind of stuff, because today, folks, for the Hindus, it's a sacred festival of Diwali, the festival of light. And in Diwali, you know, you celebrate the triumph of light over darkness, of good over evil, and this is important, of knowledge over ignorance, of knowledge over ignorance. And so the festival of lights, and listen to this here, you know, this is stuff written maybe, you know, something like 1,000 years before Christ. There is a light that shines beyond all things on earth, beyond us all, beyond the heavens, beyond the highest, the very highest heavens. This is the light that shines in our heart. There is a spirit that is in my heart, smaller than a grain of rice or a grain of barley or a grain of mustard seed or a grain of canary seed or the kernel of a grain of canary seed. This is the spirit that is in my heart, greater than the earth, greater than sky, greater than heaven itself, greater than all these worlds. That could have been straight out of the Gospels. the parable of the mustard seed. But that's, you know, ancient Hinduism for you. And so to Buddhism, the Buddha nature, the interconnectedness of all beings. And you've got here, this is on the, I'm not sure if I pronounce this right, the Tathagatagarbha Buddha, which is the Tathagata, meaning the Buddha that is beyond space and time, and Garbha, G-A-R-B-H-A, meaning the essence or dynamic embryo or womb. That's the essence of reality, is the womb that is beyond space and time, out of which the Buddha nature flows. And notice, what did the Buddha do in his life? The Buddha did three things in his life. I simplify horribly. The Buddha, having recognized the reality of suffering on coming out of his palace, went and sat underneath a tree. There he became enlightened, and then he went to form the noble Sangha, the community, the Ummah, the church, whatever word you want for it. And in those three things, you have the unity of soil, soul, and society. Soil, he went and sat underneath a tree. Soul, he received enlightenment. And society, he went and formed the community. You see how, folks, you see how this is pointing us towards the work we need to do. Our face perspectives here are pointing us towards that. Where have I got to? We've had humanist, Islam, Hindu, Buddhist. Yes, and then finally, and how am I doing? Am I okay, John? Just
you're always okay, Alastair. You keep our list.
Longer, just to
keep our list.
Finish. I got carried away on the science stuff back there more than I had intended. So I want to turn to the Hebrew tradition now, and how, and I'm using the King James here for a reason. I'm using the King James for a reason. That, right at the start of Genesis, the first point is that the stuff you have about human dominion over the other creatures in Genesis 1:28, which is kind of just a reality of how it is counterpointed in Genesis 2:15, where the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it, to dress it and to keep it, to make it beautiful and to look after it. There in the Hebrew tradition, in the Jewish tradition, you've got sustainable development bolstered centrally in, and then we move through to, let me just find Luke 4 here. So, what's going on in Luke 4 is that Jesus goes into the temple. Jesus goes into the temple, and he, being full of the Holy Ghost, full of the Holy Spirit, he goes into the temple and he stands up and he reads the reading of the day, which is from Isaiah 61 in the Hebrew Bible. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." Now, in Hebrew, that word is ruach, meaning breath. In the Greek, it comes through as pneuma, pneumatic tires filled with air, because the Spirit is the living breath, not just of humankind, but of God. God breathed, ruah, God's Spirit, over the earth in the creation. And the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted. That's why I chose the King James Version, because that line about brokenheartedness is not in most of the modern translations. It's obviously from a manuscript that the King James used, but the modern scholars may be considered to be a later manuscript. But, I think the Spirit is in that line. So that's why I love this, to heal the brokenhearted. That is the work we need to do in these times. We need to heal the brokenhearted, including in our activist communities. to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind. Consider that not just literally, but metaphorically. In what way are we captives? In what way are we blind and lame? And to set at liberty them that are bruised. And then finally, Luke 4:19, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. Now, what is that acceptable year? That acceptable year is the Hebrew Jubilee, the cycle of every 7 and every 50 years, the forgiveness of debts, the freeing of slaves, and the resting of the land, the Sabbath of the land. Now, I don't think we have to take that literally, but what that is doing in the Hebrew tradition is it is reminding us of the need to honor the land, to respect the land, that the land is God's resting place, according to the Psalms. The land is where God finds rest and gives us rest. God spoke to Adam and Eve while walking through the garden in the cool of the evening. The Hebrew word for cool, also translated as breeze, again is ruah. It can also mean the spirit of the garden. And what we see there in that simple line, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord, or in some translations, the year of the Lord's favor, in Luke 4:19, is that Jesus here is integrating the entire canon of the Hebrew land ethic into Christianity. So don't miss that, folks. Don't miss the significance of that. Now, I've got here things like, the Catholic Church's best kept secret, its social teaching, and various encyclicals, because I've just waved the King James Bible, which is, if you like, the Protestant one. So, here's on the other side here, Pope Benedict here, he talks wonderfully about human ecology in here. And I have to admit, I'm not a huge fan of Benedict or Ratzinger as he was, but what he says here is absolutely spot on. Various other encyclicals and various letters and so on. But many of you will know, I think I saw Margaret Rose McSparran there up at Dramalis. And by the way, if there's any millionaires, her centre in Larne, a beautiful centre, and they need help because of lockdown. So if the millionaire happens to be watching, please contact Sister Margaret Rose McSparran there. But I think I saw her earlier holding a copy of this. You'll know it well. I just want to end with the Pope's latest one. I've just got a photocopy here because it's not yet available in print. Fratelli Tutti. And I just want to read you here. It says in Article 117, when we speak of the need to care for our common home, our planet, we must appeal to that spark of universal consciousness, that Diwali, that spark of universal consciousness and mutual concern that may still be present in people's hearts. So, my appeal this morning, folks, is as people of faith, look at what your traditions have to bring to the table of world faiths. Look at what they have to bring to the preparations for the COP26 process. Because I don't think we're going to get out of this fix by the science and politics and economics and technology by themselves. Those are an important part of it. They're vital parts of it. Those are God-given gifts if we use them wisely. But we can only use them wisely if we come from the deepest foundations of our being. We can only use them wisely if we seek beyond our human limitations into the mystery of that Ruach, that Pneuma, that Holy Spirit, that in different ways, I believe in all our traditions that are based upon love as life made manifest, life as love made manifest. In all of our traditions, only if we reach into that and ask that to flow in us and in the work we do I see us as having hope for the human condition. And that is what gives me hope for the human condition and the future of ecological regeneration in a battered planet. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alastair. I can certainly say on behalf of the almost 100 people we have on this call, our thanks for that wonderful, passionate, informed, provocation. There's been, quite a bit of chat in terms of how provocative some of these ideas are. And certainly while I think I could speak on behalf of everybody, I could listen to you and catch the pearls of wisdom, Alastair, falling from your lips all day. We do have some other people who'd like to respond. Before I invite Geyser to speak first, could I ask you if you do have comments or questions, please put them in the chat for everybody, and we'll try and pick up on those after we've had our respondents. So could I ask our respondents to keep their comments to maximum 7, 8, 10 minutes, just so that we have enough time at the end for the general discussion. So Geyser from the Belfast Islamic Centre, you're very welcome.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Abdelal. I'm a lecturer at Queen's University. I prepared a short presentation for today, which I already presented before, but I will try to take, as John recommended, only 5 to 10 minutes. So can everyone see my presentation?
Yes, that's fine.
All right, it's a short one. It's again about Islam perspective on environment. So it's called Islam and Environment. So connecting what Alastair was just talking about a couple of minutes ago, but I would like to start with the first surah in our book, the Quran book. So in the name of Allah, the most gracious, most merciful, praise to be to Allah, Lord of the worlds, the beneficent, the merciful, Master of the Day of Judgment. Thee alone we worship, and thee alone we ask for help. Show us the straight path, the path of those whom thou hast favored, not the path of those whom earn thine anger, nor those who go astray. Just quick, again, picture of Kaaba. It's in Saudi Arabia, Mecca, where the house which was built by Prophet Abraham. So the common story between the Jews, the Christian, and Muslims, the story of creation. When again, it's mentioned in our book, Surah Al-Baqarah in the Quran. When your Lord said to the angels, I'm about to place a successor on earth, they said, will you place on it one who will spread mischief and shed blood, while we celebrate your glory and extol your holiness? Then Allah said, or God said, surely I know what you do not know. So from that day, it's the responsibility of human race to establish justice and sustainable environment. It's our responsibility, not God's responsibility. Yet God's decree is embedded in the system itself. So Allah, on that day, Allah said, so of course, he asked the angels to bow to Adam on that day, of course, but Satan refused. He said, I will not. So Allah said, what prevented you, Satan, from prostrating when I commanded you? Then Satan said, I am better than him. You created me from fire and created him from clay. Then Allah said, descend from paradise, all of you, for it's not for you to be arrogant therein. So get out, indeed you are of the debased. Of course, when he kicked out Satan from paradise. Then Allah said, indeed you are of those rebreathed. And Satan said, because you have put me in error, I will surely sit in wait for them on your straight path. Then I will come to them from before them and from behind them and on the right and on the left, and you will not find most of them grateful to you. Then Allah said, descend, being to one another enemies, Adam, Eve, and Satan on that day, and for you on earth is a place of settlement and enjoyment for a time. So all children of Adam, then God keeps saying, it's the continuation of his statement. O children of Adam, we have bestowed upon you clothing to conceal your private parts and as adornment, but the clothing of righteousness, the fear of Allah, that's best. That's from the signs of Allah that perhaps they will remember. So one of the Muslim scholars said, his name is Al-Hasan al-Basri, that's his name. He said the roots of evil are three: arrogance, envy, and greed. Arrogance prevented Satan from bowing to Adam, and then envy led Cain to kill Abel, and greed took Adam out of paradise. and a son of Adam becomes old, but two things in him becomes young: greed for wealth and greed for more life. So from Muslim perspective, I mean, I know, because usually in Europe or the West, the New World system, the separation between religion and politics, it became like a mandatory. But from Islam perspective, we have always to go back to our religion. And from our point of view, there is a lack of fear of Allah. All right. Of course, division and dictatorship, which is another also problem. Greed, of course, another thing, which leads, or at least some of them, or maybe other factors also, but these are the main three ones that lead to the environmental crisis. So in general, right, as Muslims, we believe in all religions. So we believe in the book of Revelation, Zabur, that came to David. We believe in the Torah book that came to Moses. And of course, we believe also that the gospel of Jesus. And of course, our book is Quran, all right? So in our opinion, what God wants is a diverse community of many religions. And of course, each religion has to accept the difference, right? It's the main thing, or the main ground for religion. Religion means democracy and justice, all right? So we have to accept the evolution of democracy, the evolution of the democratic system. Yes, of course. The evolution of science. Yes, of course. But we have to still be linked to religion, not without ignoring religion. So it has to be something what we call lines or red lines, something like that. From our perspective, it can be right, it can be wrong, you can agree or disagree, but that's our point of view, all right? So hopefully if this applied, then we'll reduce the selfishness and greed, and hopefully improve the environmental crisis. And that's my presentation for today. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, Gasa, thank you very much. So could I invite now Vicky Heslop from the Jampa Ling Buddhist community. Vicky, over to you.
Good day to everybody. Yes, I've been practicing Buddhism now for nearly 30 years, but only beginning to start to understand it. But I'll try and explain to you some of the basic. But I have been involved in the environment for a long time, so it's nice to join the two up today. So from the Buddhist perspective, the Buddha taught that everything is interdependent, as Alastair said. And in the Rice Seedling Sutra, Buddha speaks of a dependent arising in three ways. A, due to existence of this, that arises. Due to the production of this, that is produced. And C, it is thus, due to ignorance of how things exist in reality, there is compositional action. Buddha indicates in A that the phenomena exist due to specific conditions. Merely due to the presence of certain causes and conditions, specific effects will arise. And in B, that phenomena arise from conditions that are impermanent by nature. And in C, that phenomena are not produced from just any impermanent causes and conditions, but rather that specific ones that have the potential to give rise to specific phenomena. I think that's very important in respect to climate change. So compositional action is so called because actions serve to compose or bring about pleasurable or painful effects. In Buddhism, action is karma, the law of cause and effect. When an action has been done by a sentient being, it establishes a predisposition in the mind. This predisposition has the potential to continue unhindered until it produces an effect. There are actions whose effects are experienced in common by a number of beings, and actions that are experienced only by the one individual. Therefore, every single action that each individual person makes and the motivation for that action create the cause for an effect in the future for themselves, for other beings, and their environment. We all know that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is very, very strong, speaks out a lot about the environment. And he says that large human movements spring from individual human initiatives. So another piece of Buddhist scripture would be repaying the kindness of all beings, and it's one of the 6 causes and effect to achieve an altruistic mind. And this wish eventually arises spontaneously when one takes the time to really understand interdependence fully. Gaining that understanding, which allows this wish to arise, is important if we wish to continue to have an environment that sustains life. Did you know that it takes one bee the whole of her working life to create 1 teaspoon of honey? You could say, oh, well, that's what bees do. Or you could rejoice that due to the life's work of a bee, you have the opportunity to put a spoon of honey in your coffee. We are fortunate if we have a house to live in. Some people are not so fortunate. Do you ever stop to think about how many people and creatures were involved to create that house? There was the builder and his team who constructed it, of course. But as we go further, we see that the materials used had to be made and transported to the site of the house by other people. Look further still, and there were those that made the machines to produce the materials and the energy needed to drive them. Look further still, and there are the creatures who created the conditions that allow the raw materials to be produced, such as all those that make the soil function to allow trees and plants to grow, and those creatures that lived millions of years ago, whose dead bodies create the oil and gas we use today. So there are truly an endless number of beings involved in everything we do and have today. And without all their work, we would not have these things. Gaining an awareness of this interconnected nature of everything and being grateful for the benefits others bring to us is important, because it helps us to develop the wish to be part of this wonderful process of creation. We become more aware of the effect of our actions and to develop the wish to be kind to other beings and to maybe achieve the ability to help other beings. So now I'm just going to read some words that I took from the Dalai Lama's website. And so it says, interdependence, of course, is a fundamental law of nature. We need to appreciate this fact of nature far more than we have in the past. Our ignorance of it's directly responsible for many of the problems we face today, including the environment. Ignorance of interdependence has not only harmed the natural environment, but human society as well. Instead of caring for one another, we place most of our efforts for happiness in pursuing individual material consumption. We have become so engrossed in this pursuit that without knowing it, we have neglected to foster the most basic human needs of love, kindness, and cooperation. And this is very sad. Destructive emotions such as anger, hatred, jealousy are the cause of the damage. Biologically, we are all equipped with the ability to love, like a mother to her baby, unconditional love, looking for nothing in return, just wanting to make it happy. As humans, we have an amazing brain. If we educate in a way that increases positive emotions, rather than just about material things, then we can use our amazing intelligence to expand our capacity for loving kindness, which is the basis of our survival. Right. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Jampa Ling Tibetan Buddhist Center and how they foster this interconnectedness. So Jampa Ling is the Tibetan for meaning a place of loving kindness. And it consists of a Victorian house on 18 acres of ground, and it's in Cavan, and have been the home of the Venerable Panchen Neutral Rinpoche since 1989. When the then owner of the property, Marjorie Cross, asked Rinpoche if he would like to make it his spiritual center in the British Isles. We would all see Jampa Ling as the center of Rinpoche's mandala, which spreads as wide as his projects in Mongolia and his monastery in India, and further still through his karmic links that he has with many, many other beings. In Buddhism, we believe a mandala is created by the way we view and interact with ourselves and our surroundings. Jampa Ling functions through voluntary help, and voluntary work rewards the giver as much, if not more, than the receiver. It also generates an atmosphere of generosity that is felt by the visitors to the centre. Many people come to the centre because they need a peaceful place to rest from the stress in their lives. Jampa Ling offers a warm welcome to all, whether they have any interest in Buddhism or not, whether they want to stay quietly or to interact, or to join in the meditations, or to offer help. The only requirement of people is to respect the principle of trying to not cause harm to themselves or any other being. Meals are a time of gathering together and sharing. Most of the vegetables eaten are grown organically in the acre-walled garden. Community gardening takes place on a Wednesday, and people come in from the local community with warm and supportive conversation to work in the soil for common benefit, as the produce harvested is shared. Jampa Ling has over time become a vibrant part of the community of Bourne and Templeport, working along with them on many community projects, such as obtaining the status of a UNESCO geopark for the area. Many people who have learnt about Rinpoche's work in Mongolia and India by coming to the centre or through his students now help those who have little to become able to improve their lives with regular donations and their time. So now I've just put up 5 simple actions that I think most people could take, which will cause an improvement in the environment for themselves and others. It would be great if people listening try some of them. So find at least 3 things every day to rejoice about in your own life, or something done by someone else, or just in the environment. If you can, tell someone else about at least one of those. Try to notice the people and creatures that you pass by and give a smile to them whenever you can. Try to do one thing each day to be helpful to someone or something, ideally without anyone knowing it was you who did it. Before you eat a meal, give some thought to how many people and creatures were involved in the chain of events that occurred for you to be able to eat this food, and give thanks for their efforts. And if, when you notice a feeling arising in you and it feels uncomfortable, work hard to put that feeling in the dustbin, because if an action arises from that feeling, it will be the cause of harm for yourself and others. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Vicky, particularly in reminding us all of the importance of gratitude for the things that we enjoy and often take for granted every day. Could I just check, our next speaker was scheduled to be Raj Puri from the Indian Community Centre, but I don't think he's on the line. But can I just double check that Raj isn't here?
He's not here.
Okay.
No, we have.
Well, then can I, oh, thanks, Edwin. Can I invite Boyd Sleator from the Northern Ireland Humanist Association to come on and speak to us next. So Boyd, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Boyd Sleator. I'm the coordinator for Northern Ireland Humanists. And I guess, first of all, I should maybe give you a little explanation of what humanism is, as some of you may not know what it is. So yes, I am non-religious or an atheist. I don't believe in gods or goddesses, but that really only tells you a little bit about what I don't believe in. Humanism really gives me what my philosophical worldview is, and it's very easily put. Humanism is just using reason, evidence, and compassion to make ethical choices in your life, or at least try to make ethical choices in your life. One of the things that Alastair was talking about was the science and how we as individuals listen to that science and try to filter out the noise, as I would like to sort of try and explain it. And for somebody who doesn't have a scientific background yet still recognizes the value in it, we as individuals must listen to the scientific consensus. And I think that's really, really important. And we see this when we look at scientific consensus across lots and lots of different bits of work. We can really get an idea of what's going on and what position we should take. And I think there's something really important about being in this call today, and that isn't just about what a humanist perspective is, but it's about how we have all come together and can have a unified voice. I think the dialogue and the fact that there are many people of many different beliefs here today, looking to try and create some sort of positive change when it comes around the environment is incredibly important. And what we see when we look out there today is that we see that in the sciences. Only a few days ago, we may have, the scientific community have come together to potentially offer us a vaccine, which will help us. And when we see scientific communities and people working together, we see effective change and we see things happening. And I think that's incredibly important, and also can be reflected in the group of people that are here today. So I think that we must work together. Yeah, and I think what we need to do is to try and combat in some ways the information or the noise, as I like to call it, because for too many people, what we're finding is that they haven't gone through those stages of being able to think critically about things. And I think this is where education is incredibly important to us. And it's something that we do as an organization in terms of school speaking, and it's and part of those school visits that we do is to teach us to talk to children about how we think critically about different ideas and how we reason out different ideas, and so it's incumbent upon us to really, as individuals, to try and help others think about difficult ideas and try and help others think about these scientific ideas. And sometimes the onus also needs to go onto the scientific community to convey that in a much easier way to the general public. But I think I go back to, and I will make this quite short, in that we need to work together to make a difference. And I'll leave you with a little question which comes from Andrew Copson and Alice Roberts' the Little Book of Humanism. And it says, think about our descendants in 1 million years or two. If the relics of our technology survive the ravages of time, how will those descendants look back on us? As inheritors of power we were too naive to use well, or as pioneers who made wise choices, nurturing the natural environment of which we are a part? What would you think if you were asked if you were one of them? Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Boyd. I'm reminded, I forget, of the author of a book called How to Be a Good Descendant, just in terms of reflecting what you said there at the end. Apologies, Raj. Apparently you are on this call, but not under the name we have for you. So Raj, if you're there, can you unmute yourself and the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, everybody. And as Alastair has already explained about that Diwali, today is our Diwali, and I wish everybody a happy Diwali. Talking about Hinduism and the environment, Hinduism is one of the oldest religions in the world. It has no founder, as it says. It is the way of living and is known as Sanatana Dharma. The old religion is known as Sanatana Dharma, means one's duty towards woman and nature. Hindu believes that the whole universe is one family. They say Vasudeva Kutumbakam. The whole universe is one family, and most of Hindus understand environment means nature, world. Everything around us that is part of the God and the nature. Protecting environment is the part of Hindu Dharma, which is a religious duty of a Hindu. Hindu refrain from injuring anything and be kind to people, animal, plants, air, water, hills, forest, and earth. Care and concern for more environment is considered a religious duty in Hinduism. This has been earlier in Hindu script, the Vedas, which are the oldest scriptures in Hinduism. The Rig Veda, believed to be one of the earliest Hindu texts contains various hymns describing the sacred phenomena of nature with the different environmental elements perceived as extension of the divine. Next is the Atharveda. It has mantras that remind Hindus to need to behave respectfully towards the Mother Earth by making sure that any personal activities do not hurt her vital body or appearance. Hindu worship Mother Earth, which is called Bhumi Puja. But before doing any constructions or any work, Hindu do the worship to the Mother Earth. Some applies to the rivers, mountains, and plants extra. The Ganges is the holy river, is considered to wash away the sins of one takes bath in the river Ganges or drink holy water. Hindu believes that everything has a soul and part of the nature. So everything is sacred and valued by Hindus. We believe that our treatment of the nature affects our karma. So one can earn good or bad karma according to one's behavior towards the environment. Hindu believes that any action done can come back to us in the next life, as we believe that in reincarnation. That if you do good to the environment, you will be good in the next life, and if you do bad, you will be punished. Hinduism is very near to the nature and see God in everything, in every object in the universe. Worship of God is in air, water, fire, sun, moon, and earth is especially recommended. Hindu worship sacred rivers, mountains, forests, and animals, and love to close to the nature. For example, many villages have a sacred lake and around it a grove of trees to catch rainfall and protect the banks from erosion. These lakes and groves are places of tranquility and sanctuary for the wildlife. But recent times, the neglect of these simple techniques for gathering and protecting clear water has led to serious water shortage. Hindu teachings on environment, the Hindu because worship the five great elements which creates the web of life: space, air, fire, water, and earth. Hinduism recognizes that human body is composed out of these five elements: earth, water, fire, air, space. God is nature, such as river Ganges is worshipped to wash the sins of all Hindus or take the holy water. Protecting the environment is part of the dharma, which is the religious duty. Karma holds that each of our action creates a good or bad karma and decides our next birth, our behavior towards environment. Earth worship touched the floor before gathering out of bed. Hindus even putting their feet on the ground or on the earth, pray to earth or request the earth mother that forgive us for doing anything on the earth. And Hindu believes in reincarnation, as I explained earlier, that it is your karmas towards all living being, all the universe. What you do, good or bad, it will come back to you in your next life. Non-violence is also one of the fundamental of Hinduism. Then sannyasas. Sannyasa says, treat the earth with the good respect. Do not cut trees because they remove pollution. Rig Veda says that. Do not disturb sky. Do not pollute the atmosphere. Yajurveda. Protection of animal is considered as sacred duty. Charak Sahita. The presence of the atmosphere and presence of the universe is so friendly in Hinduism that they've been worshipping the nature from the day one. So Hinduism doesn't believe to hurt anything which is on this universe. Thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Raj. And last but by no means least, we have Andrew, and then we can have an open discussion. So Andrew, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here with you all this morning. I'm really struck this morning at the commonality that's coming through all our speakers today about interdependence and the dependence of human beings on the rest of the earth. And I suppose when you start to look at things from a Christian perspective, obviously there's an enormous range of Christian beliefs and Christian denominations. I don't need to tell everybody on here that. And so, trying to gather up commonalities out of them all is quite difficult. But I think if we go back to the scriptures, first of all to the Hebrew scriptures and then to the New Testament, you see these, if you start reading things from an environmental or an ecological perspective, you get that sense of interdependence coming there, which actually we may not have been aware about. I think it's fascinating to look back at people's writings about nature and about the environment from the long Christian tradition. I think I see at around the time of the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, the 16th century, a move away from the understanding human beings as part of the creation to something much more hierarchical, where humans are somehow dominating or have kind of rights over God's creation. And it's that sense, which of course coincides, as I'm sure John would agree, with the rise of capitalism as we would understand it today. And we have to try and recover those older readings, the readings from our own Celtic tradition of scripture, as seeing all of God's creation as interdependent. And I mean, Alastair's mentioned some of them already, but I just a few other things from the scriptures that I really want to just pick out. I could go on for hours, but I'll just pick a few out. Right at the start of the Genesis stories, Genesis chapter 2, there's a joke, which is an unusual thing to find in the scriptures perhaps, but there's a pun. God makes Adam and he makes him from the soil. And the word for soil in Hebrew is Adamah. So he's literally, God calls Adam the earth person. You're the dependent on the soil, you're dependent on the earth, you are human beings, you are the dependent on the earth people. So right there, Adam is made from the Adamah. We might say in English, humans are made out of the humus. And so that interdependence is a clue. You go on further into the Genesis story and you see that when it comes to that story, that myth of the fall and the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, that's caused primarily, first of all, by an environmental destruction. The human beings eat from the tree that they're told not to touch. They're told this is the one thing God says to them, that you don't destroy this bit of the environment, and they go ahead and do it. So there's an ecological parable right there from the very beginning. Go on to, I'll just put a couple of these up if that's all right, just on the, I'm not going to kill you about the PowerPoint, but we'll just bring up as one thing that it took me years to spot in the Hebrew scriptures, despite having heard this story for years and years and years. The covenant with Noah, you remember the story after the ark, and God says to Noah, for all generations to come, this is the sign of the covenant between myself and you and all living creatures with you. So there's not just between God and human beings, there's an agreement between God and all animal life, all plant life, the whole earth. So that's just one example of a reading of scripture that we often miss because we're looking at it far too much from an anthropocentric point of view. Alastair already mentioned the Sabbath for the land and the Jubilee year as being a really essential part of the way in which Hebrews began to organize themselves as they developed their society. And whether that happened in practice is a debatable one, but it's nevertheless, that's the thing to aspire to, the break for the land, the chance for the environment to recover. One other perspective from the Hebrew scriptures, and that's the prophet tradition in the Hebrew scriptures. And it's that whole idea of materialism and consumption being idolatrous, being put in place of what God wants. So you see here, this is, I put up a quote from the prophet Hosea, and you see here that human beings' sinfulness, their destruction is linked to the way in which the environment also suffers. So the land and the human beings are inextricably linked and interdependent on one another. And so therefore, as it says, the land mourns and all who live in it languish because of the way human beings are treating it. So again, these are not perspectives that perhaps those of us who've grown up in churches would often have heard. But nevertheless, when you start to read the Bible ecologically, you see these things coming out much more strongly. In the New Testament, and here's another one, the heart of the Christian gospel, we have the incarnation. God becomes a human being. In other words, God becomes part of the creation in order to change it, in order to transform it. And St. Paul, who often gets a bad press, but central to his theme, I think, is this transformation of all creation. Paul says the creation is groaning in labor pains for something better to come along. So what we're seeing here is that for the Christian religion, the goal of the kingdom, as Jesus would have called it, is the transformation of all creation, not just human beings, but the whole planet into something better. And so when Jesus tells his parables and his stories, which so many of them are from an agricultural perspective, they're about justice and about redemption for creation. And just, I think one thing I did mention, that the Reformation and the rise of capitalism, I think it's interesting how the churches that didn't go through that period in the Eastern Orthodox churches have retained this idea of interdependence far more than perhaps we have in the West. And I put up this little icon there of the baptism of Christ. And this icon, as you can see in it, not only are the human beings worshipping this Jesus who's being baptized, but look carefully at the river and what's in it, only the fish and the dolphins and so forth. They're also taking part in this worship of God. So, and again, and that's a real theme if you look at Orthodox liturgies, of how the whole creation is gathered into worshiping God and being brought together in the celebration. So when the Eastern Orthodox celebrate the Eucharist, it's about the whole creation worshiping and not just human beings. That's a very quick whiz through the scriptures, but I just wanted to say a little bit about where do I think the challenges are and the hope is. Firstly, I've been working with Eco Congregation now for about 8 years. We, for those of you who don't know, we encourage parishes and congregations from all the denominations, Christian denominations, to put creation care as central to their church life and to encourage them to do things practically. We have an award scheme for churches, which a number of you people on this call I've seen, people who've taken part in our award scheme. But what things have we seen as challenges over the 8 years? I have to say, when I started 8 years ago, you'd have heard some of that climate change skepticism that would have, we've talked about before and we still see in the States. That seems to me to have disappeared in Ireland, that I've come across. Maybe other people might see something differently, but for me, it's not. It's not because it's no longer a major issue. No few people seem to deny the climate science, at least that I've come across. But what I do come across is people who think it's not really the church's main function. Our function, the church's function, is to save human souls, and the environment is at best a sort of sideline. And I think that's something we have to challenge constantly and try and get the creation care back on the agenda for churches. Other challenges, I think, are, it's fair to say, a lot of places find the congregations are aging, the clergy are aging, and that there's no time, and they're often rushed, and there's little time and little energy, perhaps, for putting these things, new things, into action. And we face apathy as a constant issue. But where do we see the signs of hope? I think it's in the many congregations up and down from north to south and east to west who've become involved with creation care. There's bound to be one near you wherever you are. The mainstream denominations have often their own creation care panels. The eco-Quakers particularly active at the moment. We of course have the whole landscape was changed with Laudato Si, the Pope's encyclical. Absolutely not just transformational for Catholics, but for all of us as well. Very inspirational document. And the real engagement with people locally and globally in the environmental issues. I think Christians have this long track record, I suppose, of global concern. We think of aid organizations like Trocra and Christian Aid and many of the others who, and that's easy to feed in. If we can highlight how much the climate change is damaging the very poorest of the world and hurting them, I think there's a ready resource to tap into. So there's wonderful signs of hope right across the country. So just leave you with a quote that I love to quote, and it comes again from the Eastern Orthodox tradition. It's from the Patriarch in Constantinople, Bartholomew, and he says, "We speak of an environmental crisis, but the crisis is not in the environment, it's a crisis in the human heart." Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew. I really like the way you brought back hope, and I think certainly that's something we might want to focus on now in terms of the discussion. I was actually reminded there's a wonderful poem by Emily Dickinson that some of you may know, "Hope is the thing with feathers," which I'm never quite sure what that actually means, and I think it speaks maybe to the importance that Alastair was putting in the chat about mysticism. There's an ineffability in some of the things that we're talking about here, but certainly before I open it up for general discussion, I've been collecting some of the questions in the chat box, but certainly for me, I think across all of the presentations, and again, many people have reflected upon this in the chat box, is we see the commonalities, that what unites us, whether it's a faith or a non-faith position, is more important than what divides us. And I'm particularly mindful of Boyd's point about the importance of working together. And again, it's reflected in, I think it was James in the chat talking about how we can continue this conversation. And certainly I hope that we can see this as the start of a conversation rather than the ending of it, and opening up new avenues of dialogue. What I'd like to do is maybe ask Alastair, while I'm gathering my thoughts in terms of trying to combine some of these questions and direct them to particular people or to some of the speakers. I don't know, Alastair, would you like to take this opportunity for the next few minutes maybe to reflect upon what you've heard? You've been very active in terms of writing stuff into the chat box. You must have more nimble fingers than me in terms of what you've been doing. But perhaps, would you like to maybe reflect upon what you've heard from the 5 respondents? You're on mute. Alastair, you're on mute.
There we go. How's that? I think we've heard from everybody here a very resonant depth. We've not heard any kind of competitiveness between these different faith perspectives. We've heard everybody bringing to the table so that we can see what each of these traditions has to offer. And I'm mindful that during my own presentation, I said at one point I was going to screen share and then I got distracted. But in terms of what we can offer, I'd like to suggest an image to leave with you about the way in which our different faiths can perhaps weave together. And so I'm just going to go into screen sharing now and pull up some slides from a talk that I gave. Are you seeing that okay, John?
Yes, fine, Alastair,
Yep,
yes.
okay. I just want to pull up some slides here from a talk I was giving to SCIAF recently, the Scottish Catholic International Aid Fund. And it's about bringing some people from the Indonesian side of New Guinea over to Scotland. And basically, I mean, you can see how in their context, these people, the situation they're living in is very considerable poverty. That's in one of their churches in West Papua province there. And, you know, interestingly, when they'd have a meeting, they'd have the Bible or the Quran, depending on their tradition, on the desk there. But we brought community leaders to the Isle of Lewis. One of you in the chat was saying, you know, what are the signs of climate change in Northern Ireland? Well, let me quickly show you that when we took them to my own village, the Isle of Lewis, to Lowerbos in the Isle of Lewis, and my friend, my school friend, Rusty, there of the North Lochs Historical Society, when we took them there, we took them out and we showed them things like this. You see the Fiannagan, the raised beds of agriculture just being eaten away by the rising tide there, the sea level, the sea levels rising and nibbling away at the coastline. So those are the signs we're seeing. But what I want to take you to is this, because at the end, and this ties in also with somebody saying, you know, how do we find hope, or how do we see hope? On the last day of their visit, we took them to this place where a ship called the Islair at the end of the First World War hit rocks and sunk, and 200 returning servicemen to the island at the end of the war were perished. But 40 of them were pulled ashore on the rope because one man, very few people could swim in those days. One man was able to swim, and he carried a light line, a messenger line ashore, thrown to him with a St. Francis knot here. That's what you call it, a St. Francis knot. And then he was able to pull a heavier hawser ashore and tie to a rock and get 40 of them off before the ship moved and the rest perished. But our visitors were extremely moved by what they saw there. And Mama Engelina here, who is a pastor in the Reformed Church community in her area, you see her here reaching down and touching it. It was as if she was blessing or seeking blessing from what it was. And just hold that image in your minds of that woman from the other side of the world coming to our Gaelic, or Gaelic, as you would say, speaking side of the world. Just hold that in your mind. And you know what she says? She says that rope is how they pulled life back into their communities. Now, you know, our community on the Isle of Lewis, I'm a Quaker myself, but I was raised in the Church of Scotland and amongst Free Church and Free Presbyterian Church people in a very, very much in the Calvinist tradition. When I was showing you the encyclicals here, you know, all these papal encyclicals that I was holding up, I almost forgot to include, if I did forget to include, this one here, which the Westminster Confession of Faith, which is the one that we were raised in, and in its shorter catechism, which many of you will know, you know, it asks, how does God manifest his decrees? And it answers, I think it's question number 8, God manifesteth his decrees in the works of creation and providence. So that's the tradition that I was raised in. And, you know, when you grow up in that, it can be quite a narrow tradition until in the kind of sharing we're having today, so the people we've just heard of, you see all these different strands. And so I ask you to hold that image of the rope and the way it's pleated together and the way the St. Francis knot was tied together. There's a wonderful line in Calvin's writings where he says, we are bound together as a holy knot. We are bound together, the holy knot. There you've got your interconnection that we heard from our Buddhist and Hindu speakers. We are bound together by a holy knot. In the Islamic tradition, they say that all believers are as one body. In the Christian tradition, the body of Christ. You see all of that coming together. And I just ask you, think about that rope, the rope by which life was pulled back into the community. And ask yourself, what are the strands that make up that rope? How can we pleat those strands together? We've heard from speakers from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different traditions this morning. There's 5 strands in the rope. We've seen the different strengths we all bring. And I think that's how we pull life back. But what are the strands that your tradition can bring? And how can we do more of this kind of work, John, that you're doing this morning in you're bringing these raw materials together and carding them together. Look at the image behind you on your screen. It's almost like the uncarded wool, the wool before it's combed, the wool before it's combed straight and then spun into the strands and then woven together, pleated together into the rope that gives strength. How can we do that? To me, that's how we do the work. That's the work facing us.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Alastair. And again, I'm not Alastair's agent, but the story he told there about the St. Francis knot and that tragic story of the boat is in his book. I think it's Poacher's Pilgrimage, Alastair, where you talk about it in more depth. A really, really great read. I've been collecting a number of questions from what people are putting into the chat. I'm just going to pull out some of them and ask any of the speakers to respond. And the first one, just because it's a very general one, and I think everybody will have something to say on it, is from Sai Lee. And Sai's question is, are you optimistic that we can make the changes needed to transition in time to a more sustainable way of life that will preserve our ecosystems and non-human animals? So who would like to go there, particularly maybe from one of our 5 respondents? Please feel just to unmute yourself and jump in. Is that you, Andrew?
Thanks. I'd like to say I'm hopeful rather than optimistic, perhaps. I'm not a climate scientist, and Alastair's covered a good bit of the science there already. Unfortunately, we don't seem to be, from what I see, getting to grips with the science and what needs to be done as quickly as we should be doing. And at the same time, I have great faith in the resilience of human beings and the resilience of traditions to get us out of the situation we're in. It is going to require, I've no doubt, some serious changes to lifestyle. And look, I mean, we find ourselves in a position right this moment where a year ago people would have laughed if you'd said we were all having to stay at home and wear masks and if we go out to the shops and so forth. So, but human beings, that proves, I think, human beings are capable when it's demonstrated to them what needs to be done, that we can adapt and we cannot. So that makes me, I suppose, hopeful rather than optimistic, maybe is a way I put it.
Great, thank you. Any of our other respondents like to come in? Vicky, Raj, or Boyd, or Gasser?
Yes, I suppose, I mean, I answered on the chat, but I think we often get very distracted by the big issues and one feel despondent that individually we can't do anything about them. But I think it's more important to focus on how we work within our own little local environment. If we begin to make our own personal changes, that will all add up to a very big change. But if we worry about the big change, to some extent, we end up doing nothing. So I think that's what I want to say.
Right. Gasser or Raj or Boyd like to comment?
I can just say very short statement. I think what I can say that from my experience, I like very much the democratic system here in Europe in general, and of course in UK and Europe, in the West in general. I like it very much. All I can say that what all faiths that we have to do together is to keep this democratic system alive. So we have to work all faiths. We have to work together to keep the democratic system alive. That's my only comment to achieve our target and save our planet. I don't have any other statement except that.
That's great. Thank you, Gasser. Boyd?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that we, as individuals, we have to be responsible. We have to understand what it is that we're trying to achieve as a responsible individual. But I think it's also important for us not to negate the fact that we actually have we don't want to consider that we have a special position in regards with the nature, but we do, and it's very important. If we don't actually accept that we have a special position in terms of animal life and nature and the environment, we can very easily put it to one side and not take on that responsibility. And so we have to recognize that it's that we need to do something in order to maintain the environment and to maintain all other animal life. In some ways, we are very responsible, and we have to understand that we're in a position that where we need to take on more responsibility, whether we like it or not. We have to take the responsibility on.
Thank you, Boyd. Raj, would you like to come in? I'd like to also invite Alastair, but Raj, would you like to say a few words?
I would say if we leave our differences of religion aside and get together and put to the public that we have to all work together for the better of environment, and put it into the young generation to know about what the damage to the environment is going on. So they will learn more than what we are all individuals are doing. So I would say get together and do better for the environment.
Okay, thank you. Alastair, do you have any thoughts on this issue of how hopeful you are that we can make the changes necessary in time? You're on mute, Alastair. You're still.
I think the first thing to acknowledge is that for people who are suffering now, people who have just had a hurricane or been burnt out in fires or whatever, we have to acknowledge the despair that is in that. We have to acknowledge the species that, what is it? When I last looked, it was something like 100 per day probably going extinct. We have to acknowledge what is being lost. And we have to say that for many people and for many species, hope, or hope in the normal sense, has been lost. But the game is bigger than any of us as individuals or any species. If we go outside in a starry night and we look up at the universe and get the world in full proportion, or if you stand beside a cliff where you can see the millions of years of rock with their evolving fossil patterns and so on, if we do these kind of things, we can see that we are part of a much bigger picture. We're held in a much greater basket that is woven for us, and that our task is to lament what has been lost, but not to wallow in our lamentations. Our task is to take what is there and pull back what life we can from that stricken ship and use it to set the seeds that, as my friend Mike Collard, who runs a place called Future Forests in County Bantry, once said to me, our task is to reset the seeds of Eden. Our task is to take what seeds we are given. He's a tree planting person. Takes the seeds that we are given and to reset the seeds of Eden.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alastair. Another question we've had in here for Rachel, and if I could just maybe paraphrase what Rachel has said, And it's really asking you all from your different perspectives of what resistance have you experienced from within your own religious or non-religious communities to the issues of climate justice. So I don't know who'd like to begin to answer that question. Andrew, just because you're nearest on my screen, would you like to kick us off there?
Okay. Yeah, as I said earlier, I haven't seen or come across much of that that resistance that we see coming across from the States of outright denial of climate change, or this so-called dominion theology where human beings have been given free rein by God to do whatever they like to the planet, and anyway it doesn't really matter because the whole thing is going to be destroyed anyway. Frankly, I haven't come across a lot of that in Ireland. Maybe I've led a little sheltered life, but I don't see much of that. Most people are aware that the environment is a problem and a crisis. And I think that the challenges in Ireland are around the sense of apathy and around the sense of still, and I mentioned this before, we need to start reading the scriptures from an ecological perspective. I think a lot of people have grown up in all the Christian traditions with this religion is about human beings, and it's about human beings being saved by whatever they mean by that terminology. And we need to constantly educate people that there's a much wider and stronger tradition that isn't just about human beings, but about the whole of God's creation. So I think that for me is that challenge, that we need to constantly put that ecological perspective back into our religions and our faith traditions.
Okay, thank you. Could I come to you, Gasser, maybe on have you experienced any kind of pushback or a rejection, a questioning of this ecological turn from your own faith perspective?
No, of course, never. I don't think if you go back to any religion, you will find zero resistance to the issue of climate change or the crisis that we are having at the moment. I mean, so no, never met anyone from my community, or either face to face or online, who is rejecting the current crisis. All agree. Again, but as I mentioned many times, we need to have an action plan to be able to do something. Awareness is perfect, is necessary, but what's the action plans? What's next? How can we be more active, and how can we achieve something in this crisis? That's my question, but I think it needs another session to agree on an action plan.
Oh, and I think also we forget that hope is active. It's about agency and action and so on. Raj, would you like to offer some thoughts on this issue?
There are various examples of Hindu organizations working on environmental initiative on both a local and a global scale. And the Bhumi project is one of the appropriate case. Established in 2009 by the Oxford Center of Hindu Studies. The UK-based project has since been perceived as a leading international Hindu voice on worldwide environmental concern. With the range of global initiative under its umbrella, it is 9 years plan. The Bhumi project recognizes that Hindu communities can become an important voice in addressing climate change. Through a unique contribution, Hindu's teachings can make. One of their global initiatives includes the Green Temples Guide and efforts to make Hindu pilgrimage sites worshipping practice around the world more environmentally friendly.
Great, thank you, Raj. Would either Vicky or Boyd like to come in on this issue? Vicky?
Well, only just to say that I think His Holiness speaks for the majority of Buddhists probably, and their attitude towards the environment. But of course, like in any religion, there are going to be individuals who don't follow, who contradict the teachings. So it's an individual thing again, but definitely His Holiness says the words of most people.
Great, that's great, thank you. Boyd?
Yeah, well, I can never speak on behalf of all humanists. That's definitely for sure. And we have to, you know, in all honesty, we have to be honest with ourselves that there are people who will question that within sort of humanist circles, within non-religious circles. They will. People do question it. And now the simple fact of the matter is that if we look at this sort of on a wide scale, it's a very small percentage of people, but the worry is for me anyhow, is that voice becomes louder, as it did with things like anti-vax movement, which has serious detrimental effects. And it's so and that sort of that anti-science sort of rhetoric, it seems to be getting louder and louder, and that concerns me. Thankfully, I think the vast majority of people, when it comes to the environment, understand how detrimental it is. They've seen it. They've seen wildfires. They have seen, you know, wildlife drop off. They've seen the extinction of animals. They have seen the state that we've left sort of wildlife in, and our devastation to our forests and our natural habitat. They see it. So I am hopeful that the vast majority of people are on board when it comes to the science. But there is a little bit of me that worries about it.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I have just one more question I'd like to ask, because we are coming up to time, but I've had a request from a faith that we haven't heard from yet, the Baha'i faith. We have Carmel on the call that would like to say a few words. So Carmel, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, John. So, you know, I just wanted to say my name is Carmel Irandoust. Thank you again to the Northern Ireland Interfaith Forum and to Mr. Alastair McIntosh. You know, I said in the chat that I haven't read your book yet, but as a fan of The Doors, I can say that I love your title, and I can't wait to actually get to deep and delve in your book. So thank you for that. You know, I just came from the Holy Land, and I lived there for 2 years, and I was Deputy Secretary General of the Baha'i International Community. So I just found out about this Interfaith Forum right now, just today, so it's my first time, so thank you for your patience. You know, when I was sitting on an interfaith panel, all the guests of the Pope actually every year come from the Christian faith, and there were bishops, archbishops, and they all came, and I remember we were sitting on this panel together, and someone asked a very political question, and what happened is that the priest responded and said, you understand the political question in the Holy Land, right? You know exactly what the topic is, you know exactly what he was pointing at. And this priest replied and said, we are here to look at what unites us and not what divides us. Our role is to focus on what has to do with morals and how to better the community that we live in, not what divides us. We don't have anything to do with politics. And that was really a learning curve, because even the Archbishop asked the question, then sat down very quietly on his chair, and then we continued to listen to what the panel had to say. The reason why I wanted to have just a few words about climate change is because we understood from everybody, and what they said is that what matters, and actually Alastair said it, it's this idea of love, yes, but I would go a little bit further, where we can see that there's a profound need for coherence between principles and actions. The principles are the principles of love, but most importantly, I believe, and this is from where I'm coming from and where you are all coming from, is this idea of oneness. You have used the image of the human body, Alastair. This is something that really is profound and means that we are all the different cells and members of one human body. We all have different responsibilities, we have different functions, and we must be aware of it. So the principle is this idea of the oneness of mankind. And you know, when I share about this, I go with the quote of, some of you have shared some quotes from your religious backgrounds. I will allow myself to share 2 quotes for you. The first one is that the earth is but one country and mankind is citizens. And the second is that true peace and tranquility will only be realized when every soul will have become the well-wishers of all mankind. So don't get me wrong here. This is not an idea of oneness that is only based on utilitarian notions of cooperation, but rather it's this idea to anchor the aspiration of individuals, communities, and nations for the progress of humanity. This is principle-wise. Now, practical-wise, what do I mean? There are 3 main actors, friends, in society that can help, and each one of you have spoken about it. Individuals, communities, and institutions. Individuals, practically, I am thinking of the children and the young people. What I'm sharing with you is a statement that I put in the chat box that was written in 2008. But look how the Baha'i community has humbly offered this point in a concrete way. They just said youth and children should be the ones who we should focus on right now as individual members of community, because they are the ones who are going to be our leaders tomorrow. Now, I'm really paraphrasing. The second idea is the idea of the community. The role of gender, friends. Today, most of the human workforce are women. They don't have access to this knowledge and to this science. So this really brings the idea that women are not only a victim, but they are really empowered and active agent of change. They should have access to this knowledge, which brings me to this idea that religious leaders, each one of you present here, and people of faith and not faith as humanists, they must actually really promote, as our Boyd said, science and religion should go hand in hand. And this knowledge should be actually shared by all the religious leaders in the most remote communities. I worked for World Vision Ireland for 2.5 years, and I can tell you I've seen the power of religious leaders with their communities. And the third, very briefly, idea is that our institutions, which are our governments, should actually bring a change. And you know, I worked at the United Nations headquarters in New York City for a few years, and I can tell you the problem are not the international agreements that we have. The problem is the way that they respect them and the way that they implement them. So we have everything in place right now that has all the ingredients for us to respect and to implement them, and people should be made accountable. So thank you again for your time. I'm so sorry I just crashed the interfaith panel, but I'm very excited about every single contribution and all the questions that were asked. Thank you.
No, our pleasure. More than welcome, Carmel. And in fact, I think it's clear from the questions that we're not going to get around to, friends, this time, that we have to have more of these, as Alastair said. I don't want to keep people longer than we had specified, but I think I'd like to thank all our contributors, but can I just ask to leave the last word to Alastair before I close off, and wish you all a good weekend. So Alastair, any remaining thoughts you'd like to share with us? And you're on mute. You're on.
Thank you, John. I really need to get the hang of this. Just listening to what's just been said and so on, it just, it just reminded me of two books I've got shut up on my shelf here, sent to me by my friend Alan Faulkner, who is the Church of Scotland minister, working in Northern Ireland, and mindful that this event is hosted not just by the Green Party, but also by the Northern Ireland Interfaith Forum. And basically, I don't know who the other authors are here, but what Alan was drawing attention here to is how the experience of terrible conflict in Ireland has also given great experience about reconciling memories, reconciling what has happened in our past as a consequence of violence in its many forms, and moving beyond our divisions, whether sectarianism or interfaith or other forms of division. And I would just want to say to you all today, thank you for holding this space. And please do not underestimate the immense wisdom that you have built up out of your suffering in Ireland, both in the north and in the south, out of your suffering that can be brought to bear on the much wider problems that the world today faces.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alastair. Can I just thank all our guests, including Alastair McIntosh, Andrew Orr, Boyd Sleator, Raj Puri, Vicky Heslop, Gasser Abdelal, and also particular thanks to Edwin Graham from the Northern Ireland Interfaith Forum and David Ross from the Green Party in Northern Ireland for hosting this. I can say without a shadow of a doubt that has not only been the largest session we've ever had, and we've been running these events for the last number of years. It's clear we've only touched the surface, friends, and we definitely need to continue this conversation. So please watch this space. Apologies to those whose questions I didn't get around to, but hopefully at a later series of events, we can explore these things in greater detail. So as I always say in these events, in the words of that wonderful Irish comic, Dave Allen, may your God go with you. And I wish you all a very pleasant and restful weekend, hard won by the Labour movement. All right, folks, listen, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.